At the edge of the departure terminal, a young couple moved slowly through the crowd, their baby nestled snugly against the mother's chest in a soft gray carrier, while the father kept a firm grip on a faded diaper bag slung over his shoulder. The morning buzz of the airport was in full swing, rolling suitcases humming, conversations echoing, flight announcements cutting through the air every few minutes, but the family of three seemed calm, composed, maybe even a little tired, like they had done this routine many times before. The baby slept peacefully, unaware of the world unfolding around them, her small head covered in a pink cap, her tiny hands tucked under a soft blanket. The mother kept adjusting the blanket gently, her eyes scanning the signs ahead, while the father occasionally glanced at his phone, checking the gate number again. The diaper bag had patches sewn onto it, the kind you find at souvenir shops or on online gift sites, a small green dinosaur and a cartoon sun smiling next to a stitched quote that said, "I run on coffee and chaos." The bag itself was well worn, with a slight tear on the side and a zipper that had seen better days, but it looked like any other diaper bag in an airport, packed with what you would expect: diapers, baby wipes, formula, extra clothes, and a few small toys. Nothing about them stood out, and that was probably the point. No one turned to look at them, no one asked questions. They were just another family trying to make their way to their destination. The father was dressed in a faded hoodie and dark jeans, the kind of outfit that was easy to sleep in if the flight took longer than expected. His sneakers were untied, the laces flopping against the tiled floor, but he did not seem to care. The mother wore a long cardigan over a tank top and leggings. Her face looked a little pale and tired, the way new parents often looked, and her hair was pulled into a messy bun. As she walked, she whispered a lullaby under her breath, something soft and sweet, barely audible over the sound of rolling bags and echoing announcements. The baby stirred for a moment, but did not wake. She adjusted again, pressing her head gently against her mother's chest. They reached the customs checkpoint just as a group of business travelers filed in behind them, talking about spreadsheets and connecting flights. The father glanced up and saw the uniformed agents waiting behind glass dividers, the signs that said customs and immigration, and the blue line on the floor that marked where they had to stop and wait. The family paused there as instructed and watched as a security officer approached with a canine unit, a golden retriever with a calm and focused demeanor. Its handler moved slowly, letting the dog sniff each person in line one by one. The father tightened his grip on the diaper bag out of instinct, not fear, just habit, the way you protect something valuable or maybe just heavy. Without realizing, the golden retriever passed two passengers ahead of them, then one more, then turned its head suddenly and locked its eyes on the diaper bag. Its body stiffened slightly, its nose twitched, and in an instant it let out a sharp bark that echoed through the terminal, causing a few people to look over. The mother flinched, the baby stirred, the father froze. The golden retriever held its stance, eyes still locked on the diaper bag. Its bark had been loud enough to halt the casual flow of the customs line, and the air shifted slightly as tension slipped in, unnoticed by most, but thick and real for the family standing under the gaze of the security team. The handler moved quickly but calmly, kneeling beside the dog and offering a short command that the animal obeyed, its nose pressing toward the lower half of the diaper bag, tail straight, ears alert. While the handler looked up and gave a subtle nod to the nearest customs officer, the father blinked once, twice, trying to understand what was happening. Still gripping the strap of the diaper bag, now his hand slightly damp, the mother stepped closer to him, instinctively protective, her other hand holding the baby tightly as the little girl began to squirm, her eyes fluttering open, confused by the noise and the sudden halt in motion. The officer approached with a measured pace, no weapon drawn, no raised voice, just an air of control and procedure that felt colder than it probably was. "Excuse me, sir, can you please step to the side for a brief inspection?" The words were clear and polite, but not optional. The father nodded slowly, saying, "Yeah, sure, no problem," his voice almost a whisper, his throat dry and unsure. The couple followed the officer to a secondary screening area, a few steps away, separated by a glass barrier and a row of metal benches, the kind that made you feel exposed even though they were meant for waiting. Another officer joined them, this one with gloves already on, standing beside a metal table where the father was asked to place the diaper bag. He hesitated only a moment, then set it down gently, as if the bag still contained nothing more than soft blankets and snacks for their daughter. The officer began unzipping the compartments, methodically, starting with the obvious ones, pulling out a bottle, a teething ring, a small plastic giraffe, and a stack of folded diapers, all standard, all innocent. But the dog continued to bark, its nose now pressed close to the side pocket, the one with the small tear along the seam, the one that barely zipped anymore. The officer paused, his gloved fingers brushing over the fabric before he unzipped it slowly and reached inside. The couple watched silently, the mother's hand covering her mouth, her eyes wide and unblinking, the father clutching the edge of the table as if grounding himself for whatever might come. Next, from the side pocket, the officer pulled a tightly wrapped bundle about the size of a paperback book, sealed in layers of plastic, the material foggy but still clear enough to show a fine off-white powder pressed flat inside. The mother gasped, audibly, and took a step back while the father stared at the object as if seeing it for the first time. The officers exchanged a look and one of them spoke into a small radio clip to his vest asking for a supervisor and backup to join the station. The handler kept the dog calm but alert while the atmosphere shifted from routine to critical in seconds. The diaper bag, once a symbol of comfort, now sat open and exposed, holding something that should never have been there. The mother stood frozen, her eyes locked on the bundle resting on the metal table, her lips parted, but no sound came out. Her baby stirred against her chest, restless from the tension in the air. The father tried to speak, his voice low and uneven, saying he had no idea what that was, that the bag was his, yes, but that he packed it himself and there was nothing like that in there when they left home. The officers did not react emotionally. They had heard these words before many times, the same tone, the same disbelief, sometimes real, sometimes rehearsed. They asked the couple to take a seat on the nearby bench while they waited for the supervisor to arrive. The mother moved slowly as if underwater, still rocking the baby in a daze, while the father sat down stiffly, rubbing his hands together over and over, watching the officers handle the package with precision. One of them placed it into a clear plastic evidence bag, sealing it and labeling it, while another called in the serial number through a radio strapped to his shoulder. The golden retriever, now calm, sat near its handler, rewarded with a quiet praise and a gentle scratch behind the ears, unaware of the storm unraveling around the family. The minutes stretched long and silent, broken only by the muffled voices of airport announcements and the distant buzz of rolling luggage. The supervisor arrived wearing a dark jacket with security credentials around his neck and a look that was hard to read. He reviewed the situation with the officers, took photos of the package and began asking questions, direct but calm questions. Where had they flown in from? How long had they owned the diaper bag? Who packed it? Did they stop anywhere before the airport? Did anyone have access to their luggage while they waited in line? The father answered as best he could, explaining they had come from a small town outside the city. They had taken a car to the airport. They checked in late. They never left their bags unattended. No one else had touched anything. He sounded more desperate now, not angry, just frightened, confused, trying to hold on to reason, while the mother remained quiet, occasionally looking down at her baby as if checking to see that she was still there, still safe. One officer walked away to cross-check their boarding passes and flight path. Another ran a preliminary field test on the substance, confirming what they had feared. It was not flour or powdered formula or baby care products. It was a potent illegal drug, neatly packaged as if it had always belonged there. The couple watched this unfold helplessly. The father stood suddenly, insisting again that they knew nothing, that someone must have planted it, maybe at the airport, maybe while they were distracted. But the officers did not raise their voices. They asked him to sit back down and wait. They reminded him that everything he said was being noted and recorded, that the more honest he was, the better things would go. The father nodded slowly, his legs trembling beneath him. The mother finally looked up, her voice soft and raw, asking what would happen next. The baby began to cry. The baby cried louder now, her tiny fists clenching and unclenching against her mother's chest, the sound sharp in the sterile air of the customs room, as if the small child could sense the fear pressing down on her parents. The mother gently bounced on her heels, whispering something soft into the baby's ear, something soothing, even though her own heart was pounding too loud to hear herself speak. The father kept looking back and forth between the diaper bag and the officers, as if trying to find a moment where everything had gone wrong, a moment he might have missed, a moment when someone might have slipped that bundle into their possession. The supervisor spoke again, asking if either of them had lent the diaper bag to anyone in the past week, if anyone had visited their home, if anyone had packed it for them or helped them load the car. The father answered with a shaking voice, saying no, no one had borrowed it, no one had helped, he had packed it himself. And the mother had double-checked. They were organized, always organized. They were new parents, but they were careful. They did not even let family take the baby out without them. One of the officers returned with a printout and handed it to the supervisor, who scanned it carefully before looking back at the couple. He asked about a stopover at a regional airport the night before, a short delay caused by weather, a late gate change and a hold in the waiting area while crews cleaned the plane. The mother and father looked at each other, trying to remember the night before, the delay, the waiting, the empty terminal, the walk down the side hallway to a different gate, the diaper bag sitting by the father's foot while he rocked the baby stroller. A silence stretched between them as the memory returned. The father's eyes widened just slightly, as if something began to click. The moment when a man in a gray hoodie had bumped into him hard enough to make him stumble, the way the man had mumbled sorry and kept moving. The father remembered picking up the bag again, not thinking twice about it, just assuming it was his, the exact same style, the same cartoon dinosaur, the same tear on the side. He told the officers about the man, about the bump, about the strange coincidence, and how he thought nothing of it at the time. The officers listened carefully, then looked at each other. The supervisor asked if he was absolutely sure it was the same bag, if it was possible someone could have switched it in that moment. The father nodded slowly, face pale, eyes wide, trying to breathe steadily. The supervisor stepped away for a moment, speaking quietly into a radio. Another officer followed him, carrying the diaper bag and the evidence package, while 2 others remained with the couple, their posture still professional, but not unkind. The mother sat down finally, her body sagging under the weight of it all, the baby now calm again, resting her head against her chest, while the father leaned forward with his elbows on his knees, hands covering his face, trying to hold himself together. The waiting room felt colder now, even though the thermostat had not changed and the light still hummed softly above their heads. The mother sat motionless, her arms wrapped tightly around her daughter, whose breathing had slowed into soft, peaceful rhythms. The father stared at the floor, his eyes dry but empty, his hands clasped together so tightly that his knuckles had turned white. The officers said very little during those moments, offering only water and a quiet reassurance that the process was still underway, but every second that passed without answers felt like an hour. After what felt like forever, the supervisor returned, holding a small tablet and a folder in his hand. He did not sit, he stood in front of them, his expression unreadable, as he explained that they had begun reviewing security footage from the regional airport where the couple had their layover. He said they found something unusual, something worth looking into, and that it was being escalated to a higher authority for verification. The father looked up sharply, his voice cracking as he asked if they saw the man he bumped into, if they saw him swap the bag. The supervisor nodded slightly and said there was footage of a man lingering in the area near where they had been sitting, a man who moved close several times, always positioning himself behind them for brief moments. One clip showed him reaching down near the diaper bag, then walking quickly away before disappearing into a crowd. The supervisor explained that while the footage was not entirely clear, it was enough to raise serious concern that the couple had been targeted not by chance, but by design. The mother asked in a hoarse whisper what that meant for them, what would happen now, and if they were still being treated as suspects. The supervisor said procedures had to be followed, that the package found in their bag had already been logged and tested and reported to authorities beyond airport security. Now federal agents would be involved because of the nature of the substance and the method of concealment, and because their names were tied to the incident, even if temporarily. The father stood then, his voice stronger than before, his words urgent but controlled. He said they had done nothing wrong, that they had no idea what was inside that bag, and he begged them to look further, to check every angle of the footage, to investigate the man in the hoodie who had orchestrated this. He said his daughter was only 5 months old, that they had saved for months for this trip, and now everything was falling apart in front of them. The supervisor listened carefully, then assured them that everything they said was being taken seriously, that the footage gave weight to their story, and that if further evidence supported their claims it would change the course of the investigation. He reminded them again to stay calm and cooperate, and that they were not under arrest at this moment, but needed to remain at the airport for further questioning. The baby stirred in her mother's arms, her tiny hand wrapping around a strand of her mother's hair, completely unaware of the chaos unfolding around her, unaware that her family now stood at the center of a quiet storm. Time moved strangely inside the security office. It did not feel like morning anymore, though the sun still cast shadows across the airport floor through high glass windows. The family remained in a quiet corner, separated from the rest of the terminal by glass and tension. The mother now rocked slowly back and forth, whispering softly to the baby who had fallen asleep again, her small face resting peacefully on her shoulder. The father paced a few steps back and forth, his eyes locked on the door, as if expecting someone to walk in and tell them it was all a mistake, that they were free to go. Instead, a new figure entered the room, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder. He introduced himself as an agent from the Federal Narcotics Bureau. His tone was even, his steps measured. He asked the officers to give them space, then sat across from the couple, pulling out a notepad and a pen and asking them to walk him through their day from the moment they left home to the moment they stepped into the customs line. The father did most of the talking now, his words gaining momentum as he recalled every detail: the early morning drive to the regional airport, the baby crying in the car seat, the delay at the gate, the strange man who bumped into him, the bag that felt just a little heavier after that moment, but not enough to question it. He described the man as best he could: a gray hoodie, a beard, maybe early 30s, tall, but not unusually so. The mother added small details too, like the way he had looked around before disappearing and how he had been watching them, or at least it felt that way. The agent wrote everything down, nodding occasionally but saying very little. His eyes moved from one parent to the other, measuring their words, their expressions, the way they told their story, and how their voices shifted when they mentioned their daughter. Once they finished, he leaned back in his chair and said the story aligned with the footage they had seen, and that this method of smuggling was not new. It was smart, cruel, and calculated, using innocent families to transport illegal goods across borders without ever knowing they were being used. The mother closed her eyes for a moment, pressing her cheek against the top of her baby's head, her voice barely audible as she asked if they were going to be separated. The agent looked at her directly and said that at the moment they were not being detained, but the investigation was active and ongoing. He said their passports would be held temporarily while they reviewed more footage and cross-referenced travel logs, and that they would need to stay in the city until further notice. The father nodded, slowly understanding what that meant. No return flight, no hotel reservation, no certainty, just limbo, while strangers searched for a man who may or may not still be in the country, who had vanished as easily as he appeared. He looked at his daughter then, and something hard settled in his chest, something cold and permanent, the knowledge that someone had used their family as a weapon, without warning, without care, without a trace. The sun had begun to set, casting a warm golden hue across the airport, but inside the security wing the light felt artificial and harsh, as if the day outside belonged to someone else and not to the family, still trapped in a holding pattern with no clear end in sight. The mother sat hunched forward, now her hands wrapped protectively around her daughter, who remained asleep, worn out by the noise and movement and confusion that had surrounded her all day. The father stood at the far end of the room, speaking in low tones to another officer who had come in to update them on the search for the man in the gray hoodie. The officer said more footage had been found, this time from a corridor near baggage handling at the regional airport. It showed the same man entering a restricted area briefly before returning to the passenger gate, walking with purpose, his face partially obscured by the hoodie and beard, but the way he moved was confident, not rushed. He carried a bag in his left hand, one that matched the couple's almost exactly. The officer explained that this kind of operation was part of a growing trend involving organized crime rings that targeted vulnerable travelers, often families with small children, because they attracted less suspicion and were easier to manipulate without direct contact. The father listened carefully, his fists clenched at his sides, not from anger, but from the feeling of helplessness that had been building all day. He asked if the man had been caught, if there were any leads, but the officer shook his head, saying only that the footage had been turned over to federal analysts and facial recognition teams, and that alerts had been sent to surrounding airports, train stations, and border crossings, just in case he tried to leave the country. Back in the small waiting area, the mother looked up as the door opened again. This time a woman entered, dressed in plain clothes and holding a tablet. She knelt down beside the mother and offered a soft smile before explaining that she was from Child Services, and that any time a minor was involved in a federal investigation, a representative was required to speak with the family. The mother's heart sank, her grip on her daughter tightening for a moment, until the woman gently reassured her that the visit was not punitive, just procedural, a way to ensure the child's well-being, and that all policies were being followed. The father returned to sit beside them, listening as the woman asked a series of questions about the baby's health routines, emergency contacts, and travel history. Her tone was kind but careful, professional, without being cold. She made a few notes, then stood and told them she would file her report immediately, and that from her perspective the child was in safe and attentive hands, which would be noted in the case file. When she left, the family was once again alone in the room, the silence thicker than before, broken only by the quiet beeping of a machine near the corner of the room. The father took his wife's hand then and held it tightly, not to comfort her exactly, but to remind them both that they were still here, still together, still standing. Morning arrived without rest. The lights in the airport never dimmed, the air never softened, and the family never truly slept. They had been given a small private room near the customs office, a cot for the baby, and 2 hard chairs where the parents took turns dozing off, only to wake at every sound, every door opening, every footstep in the hallway outside. The diaper bag, now sealed in evidence tape, had been taken away hours ago, and with it a piece of their peace. The space where they waited felt like a suspended moment in time, stretched between suspicion and release, between truth and procedure. Just after sunrise, an agent returned, this one younger, with tired eyes and a folder tucked beneath his arm. He sat down across from them and said the words they had been waiting to hear. The investigation had taken a turn. The footage from the regional airport had been enhanced and cross-referenced. The man in the gray hoodie had been identified. He was already wanted in connection with other smuggling attempts and was believed to be part of a larger network operating through domestic airports, targeting families with small children and inconspicuous luggage. The agent explained that a bag almost identical to theirs had been found discarded in a service hallway near the airport cafe, likely tossed once the switch had been made. The contents inside included generic baby items similar to their own, but arranged to conceal a hollow interior designed to hold contraband. The tactic was clever, brutal, and clean. Families like theirs had been used before, and in most cases never even discovered until it was too late. The mother sat quietly, tears falling freely now, though she made no sound. She just held her baby close as the father asked what would happen next. The agent told them their names would be cleared from the incident record, a formal statement would be filed, and their passports returned within a few hours. He said they were free to leave, but advised them to stay in the area a bit longer until the paperwork processed and someone from the agency would assist them in finding a hotel and arranging the rest of their travel plans. The father nodded slowly, letting the words settle in like stones sinking into water. His shoulders dropped slightly and he closed his eyes just for a moment, breathing in a little deeper than before. When he opened them, he looked at his daughter, who had woken again, her eyes wide and blinking, curious and innocent and unaware of the storm she had just survived. Later, as they stepped out into the main terminal again, the noise of the world rushed back, and louder than they remembered. Brighter, faster, colder. People moved around them, talking, laughing, arguing, rushing toward flights and goodbyes and ordinary destinations. The family stood still for a moment at the edge of it, all three of them changed by a moment that no one else around them would ever know happened. The mother adjusted the carrier, the father reached for her hand, and the baby turned her head toward the sun streaming through the windows, her gaze calm and steady, her world quiet again at last.